Hey everyone, welcome to the Rybrary. I'm your librarian, no talking in the Rybrary. It's the day after Halloween, so I hope you all got a lot of candy, or actually probably gave out a lot of candy, because you're probably adults if you're watching this channel. Let me know if you're a kid and you're watching this channel, because you probably shouldn't be. At the end of last month, I did a TBR video where I rolled some dice to decide the 5 books that I was going to shoot to read in the month of October, and those were all horror books. I actually ended up reading 6 books, but only 3 of them were from that list, which I kind of anticipated because I'm not good at sticking to reading TBRs. I kind of read what I want to. I'm a mood reader, so I ended up doing 3 of those books that I picked on that list, and then 3 others. 6 sounds like a lot for me, but actually a lot of them were short. One was a novella, and one was a collection of manga short stories, which I read in like a day. So that 6 is maybe a little inflated. It didn't necessarily feel like 6. So today I'm going to recap those 6 horror books that I read for the month of October. The first book that I read at the beginning of the month, and which honestly kind of put a damper on the month because it was kind of a disappointment, unfortunately, is When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. This is a new horror book, just came out earlier this year by a rising star in the world of horror, Nat Cassidy. I read his novella called Rest Stop earlier this year and loved it. I thought it was great, and so I was excited to get around to this. And unfortunately, it just didn't do it for me. It actually took me 10, 11 days to finish this thing just because I was not enjoying myself reading it. This is a book about a young, struggling actress named Jess who one night discovers a young boy hiding in the bushes outside of her apartment complex. This is shortly followed by a run-in with a creature who may or may not be the boy's father. People get killed in the ensuing, encounter, and Jess and the boy, go and flee. At first you think that because the creature is kind of like a werewolf thing, you think that this is a werewolf book. But the nature of the thing that Jess and the boy encounters changes as the story goes on, and they flee to, different kinds of horrific creatures and things. It's sort of hard for me to explain what I didn't like about this book. I've been thinking about it quite a bit, and I still can't quite put it into words. I can certainly see why people do like it. It is, fast paced. It's, sort of fun, I guess, while also having a compelling, concept at its core. But all of it just felt very surface level to me. It felt like a Blumhouse movie. There wasn't a lot of intensity in the actual execution. There wasn't a lot of emotion in the actual execution. That's how it came off to me, at least. I mean, I can certainly see others seeing it differently. I think part of it might be, and this is something that I'm sort of figuring out about myself, is that this is like a thriller, in structure, and I'm learning that I don't love that. I don't love the format of thrillers. There's not a lot of room for reflectiveness and, room for thematic or emotional stuff to sink in. But I will say that objectively, the concept here is sort of interesting, and it has a good ending. I'll give it that. It's got a good kind of disturbing ending. I might come back to this at some point in the future and give it another shot, because it maybe is something that I have to be in a different kind of space to appreciate more. The next book that I read, and I told you in the TBR I was going to do it, and there was no chance that I was not going to read this book in the month of October, and that is The Fisherman by John Langan. My God, what an amazing, amazing book. This is absolutely my favorite read of the month, and will certainly be in my top 10 at the end of the year. This is a literary horror book that is about 2 men, Abe and Dan, who are both widowers. They're widowers, but they're younger-ish, in their 30s or whatever. And they're fishing buddies. And these 2 men, their wives died in very different ways. Abe's wife, died of cancer slowly over a couple of years. Dan's wife and children died in a car accident. So this book deals with that dichotomy really well in their sort of responses to grief and those deaths. I think a lot of people criticize the heavy amount of, grief that is utilized in modern horror, and especially in modern horror movies, where like I see people complaining that it's it's overused. Maybe that's true, but it's so well used here. So Abe and Dan are looking for new fishing spots, and Dan discovers the existence of this place called Dutchman's Creek. This place is difficult to even find on a map or anything like that. It's people don't really seem to know about it, but they do manage to track down someone who knows about the history of this area called Dutchman's Creek. Once they do, we have in the middle of this book, we have about 40% of the book is a separate story about the history of Dutchman's Creek and the area around it, and this entity called the Fisherman. Some people, from what I've read, didn't like this sort of very extended interlude in the middle of the book. I loved it. I loved that whole part of it, and I thought it was an interesting structural difference from, more conventional narrative structures. And then once they discover the story behind Dutchman's Creek and the significance of it and what it could mean for them, they have choices to make about whether they want to go there and what they want to do. Like When the Wolf Comes Home, I read this pretty slowly, but unlike When the Wolf Comes Home, I did because I was really savoring it, and it seemed to compel me to read it slowly and to really take in the prose. Langan really manages to make you visualize and feel immersed in these environments of upstate New York and the Catskill Mountains in particular, where this takes place. The actual cosmic horror elements were excellent. A really interesting approach to that kind of stuff. It's a very bleak and dark world of cosmic horror that he has made, but it's also one that feels very mythic and very strange rather than horrific. I saw someone in a review for this book say that there's it feels like, sort of Greek mythology, that it has that sort of energy to it, and then there's like a dignity to the cosmic horror elements here, and I liked that word a lot for describing the way that Langan executes those parts of this book. I absolutely loved this. The prose is amazing. There's a great thematic weight to it, and it's got great cosmic horror. All of those combined to make this, one of my favorite books of the year for sure. And then a sort of change of pace for the next book that I read here in October, and that is Slugs by Sean Hudson. An 80s trashy, pulpy animal attack horror extravaganza. This is about a small community in England that comes under siege by giant killer slugs. This was everything I expected it to be going into it. It was just a fun, gruesome, campy ride full of disgusting slug attacks and invasions in orifices. Unfortunately, it was not much more than that. If you want a just purely entertaining, purely gruesome equivalent to a trashy 80s horror movie, which this is a trashy 80s horror movie. I haven't seen it yet, but it was adapted into one. If that's what you're looking for, this will give you that, but it won't give you anything else. There's not a lot of thematic depth here. There's not a lot of emotional depth here. You don't really care very much about the characters. Maybe a little bit, but not really. It's pretty repetitive. There's a lot of scenes of just, we get introduced to a character and give them a little bit of their backstory, and then they get attacked by and killed by slugs. Also, the ending was kind of weak. It didn't really match the intensity of a lot of the rest of the book. I kept thinking about James Herbert's The Rats, which I read last year while I was reading this, which is a similar concept with rats, and is also a British horror book from, earlier than this, from the 70s, but, roughly around the same period, and how different of an experience that book was to this. I actually might make a video just comparing the two, because they seem to serve such different purposes despite having fairly similar subject matter and being structurally fairly similar. They're books that are in many ways are very similar and in many ways are very, very different. So yeah, I definitely don't regret reading this, and I had a good time with it, but I'm not rushing out to read the sequel to this called Breeding Ground necessarily, whereas with The Rats, I definitely do want to read the remaining books in that trilogy. So Slugs was actually a lot shorter than I thought it would be based on this thickness. As you can see, the text is fairly huge on this. The margins are pretty big, and then like the last, like 10% of this is like the first chapter or whatever of Breeding Ground, the sequel to this. So I finished this a lot faster than I thought I was going to, and so I realized I had some extra time to fill in with some stuff. And if you watched the channel recently, you'll have seen my video on 5 Lovecraftian authors who I wanted to recommend. One of those was Algernon Blackwood, and I had not yet read his book or his novella called The Willows, which is his other big famous one besides The Wendigo. I had already read The Wendigo. I had not read The Willows, so I wanted to get that in. The Willows is a novella about 2 traveling companions who are canoeing down the Danube River through Austria and into Hungary. And this takes place in a certain area of the Danube River that he describes as kind of branching off into, 1,000 little rivers, and basically becomes just a big swamp area for some length of the river in Hungary. These 2 men decide to stop on like a little island in this swamp to rest, and strange things start to happen, and they start to encounter strange behavior amongst the large amount of willows that are present in this area, and it starts to play with their minds. This is great, and you can see how it influenced Lovecraft, which I talk about a little bit in the other video. Especially, the parts of it that emphasize the strangeness and the wonder of the natural world, and the kinds of, things that might be out in the natural world and that we don't understand or know about. I love that particular aspect of cosmic horror, so this was very appealing to me in that way. It was kind of slow and pretty subtle, especially when it comes to the horror elements, and it had kind of an abrupt ending that I didn't love, but on the whole it was really good, and I definitely felt that I got what I wanted to. As a fan of cosmic horror generally, I feel like I got what I wanted out of reading this sort of foundational text of the genre. And so this is available in the public domain, and you can go read it on Project Gutenberg, which is where I read it. The 5th book that I read, which I was expecting to be the last one, but I squeezed in one more other thing after that because I had some spare time. The 5th book here that I read was The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, a English ghost story in the tradition of M.R. James and his ilk. This was made into a movie starring Daniel Radcliffe, as you can see up there. I also saw the play version of it when I was in London many years ago, and it has the distinction of being the only stage play I've ever seen that actually frightened me, which, kudos. This was good. The prose was killer. I like very evocative while not being excessive. This is about a young solicitor slash attorney or whatever named Arthur Kipps, who is sent by his employer to go settle the affairs of a woman named Alice Drablow, who has just recently died and lives in this small town in England called Crithen Gifford, I think it's called. She actually lives in a big house near there called Eelmarsh House that is out in the marshes, getting toward the ocean. And the visual description of this area and the house in question is really great. Like, you just picture this like vast kind of mirror world where you can't really see the differences between the gray sky and the gray land and the marshes and there's just fog. And it's just like really evocative in that way, and I loved that about it. There isn't a huge amount of spooky stuff in this. It's definitely more atmosphere driven than anything, and it is sort of weirdly paced. I kept feeling like I was like 2/3 of the way through it, even when there was 20 pages left in the book. And the ending was kind of like not super climactic or anything. So it feels less conventional, in terms of the way it's structured, but also at the same time, that sort of makes it feel like a little more realistic. This is told from Arthur's perspective, and we kind of feel like this is someone's actual account of events that they experienced. And in cases like that, it's not necessarily going to be structured, in a traditional, story structure. It's pretty short. It's like 160 pages. Does not wear out its welcome, certainly. I could have done with a little more explicit, spooky stuff, and also, maybe unraveling the story of what's going on with this ghost a little earlier. But all the same, like I said, the prose was great, the atmosphere was great, the visual descriptions were great, and yeah, definitely worth my time. So I finished The Woman in Black the day before Halloween, and I was like, I don't want to quite be done with horror stuff for the month of October yet, and I'd want to read something horror on Halloween itself. So I was kind of mulling over what to do regarding that, and I remembered that I have this guy, Fragments of Horror by Junji Ito. This is a manga horror short story collection by the master of manga horror, Junji Ito. If you've watched other videos, you might know that I am not generally a fan of manga and anime. There's something about it that just doesn't jive with my sensibilities, and it feels very weird in not a good way. But Junji Ito is the notable exception to that rule. He's, both as a writer and as an artist, so incredibly talented and so good at executing horror in a variety of ways. There's, psychological stuff, there's like cosmic stuff, there's gruesome body horror, you name it, and he's great at executing it in a visual format, and at a visual format that isn't usually appealing to me. This is a collection of like maybe 8 short little stories. They're of varying quality. I mean, none of them are bad. I don't think he does bad stuff at all. But, not many of these are on par with like Uzumaki, his big graphic novel that I love. But there are some really killer ones in here, and some crazy, like, one thing I love about him is like turning the page to a giant splash page of some like crazy horrific thing that you don't even know what you're looking at. He's also really great at just like making everyone's faces look either like horrified or horrific, one or the other, and he does both of those so well. He's also so great at incorporating everyday kinds of anxieties and neuroses, and then twisting them into like very nightmarish, forms that you see as a logical extension of the everyday mundane kind of stuff that we all experience. This is only the second like sort of full length Junji Ito work I've read besides Uzumaki, and then I've read, scattered other stories, but, this definitely reminded me I need to devote some more time to reading his stuff, because it's never bad. It's absolutely always killer. If you want to check out a particular story in this collection, my favorite was called Dissection, and it's a story about a woman who is trying to be dissected. She starts by being fascinated by dissecting other things, and then realizes that she wants to be dissected herself, and is trying to get someone to do it for her. And it's so unsettling and so nightmarish. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. So those are the 6 horror works that I read in the month of October. Thank you all, as always, for visiting the Rybrary. I love you all very much. Please like and subscribe if you haven't. That would be very, very helpful for me and for the channel. Also, let me know in the comments what you read in October and what you're planning to read in November. Thank you very much, and you may now talk.